Immaginate cosa potrebbe succedere se adesso iniziassi a parlare in italiano. Ok, nessuno capisce. Don't worry, I also speak English. My name is Andrea Picchi, and I have, from academic point of view, an hybrid background. I studied first cognitive psychology and then computer science. So today we will talk about ecosystem design. An example of consistent design is the responsive design that is very popular in web design, but is not just limited to it. And two big examples of consistent design are Google search and Spotify. If you think about Google search, the MVE is just find something. Doesn't matter if you look something on your smartphone, on your tablet, on your desktop, the experience is the same. 99% is the same. Listen to music, doesn't change. Earphone doesn't change. So smartphone, tablet, desktop, experience is the same. The second approach is continuous design. Is when instead of design something vertically on one device and then replicate across all the devices in the ecosystem, we want to think about an hand-to-hand experience and distribute across all the devices in the ecosystem. As you can see, each device may play a specific role in this game. And with a continuous device, continuous experience, we can have two kinds of flow. One is called the single activity flow. And when you're performing something that takes quite a lot of time, for example, reading a book, okay? Reading a book is the kind of experience that maybe you can perform on different devices. You start on your smartphone, on the train, and then maybe you continue when you're back home with your iPad. This is an example. But watching a movie is another good example. Maybe you want to start using your Apple TV, and then maybe jump in the bed and use the iPad. That's my case. The second example is the sequenced activity flow. So it's when you need more steps in order to reach the same goal. And we will see better in the next slide what this does mean. And two examples are Eventbrite, for example. You want to book something using your desktop, but then if you want to bring with you the reservation, you need a smartphone. You can't carry your 27 iMac under your arm and say, oh, that's my QR code, scan it, please. So you need another device, a better device, and this is dictated by the context. You have to go out, stand up, walk away from your Mac, sorry about the Apple example, I'm a fanboy. And so you have to walk out and you have to bring something else with you, and that's the example. But even Airbnb is a little bit more subtle example, but it works pretty well. You want to browse all the property using your desktop because the real estate, 27 inches is better. But then if you want to get to the property using a map, you need a smartphone. If you want to call the landlord, you need a smartphone, but it's the same app. So in the continuous scenario, we can have two main kind of activity plus an edge case. So we said one defined by multiple sections, okay, when the activity may involve different devices. Another one is the shifting context, okay, when different environments, you need different environment and involve different environment. And the third one, and I just tagged it as an edge case, is because when the user voluntarily breaks down an activity, it doesn't need to break down that activity, but it's convenient for you for some reason. So he breaks down the activity and maybe resume that activity on a different device. The third one is the complementary design. In this case, we have two or more devices working together and reaching the whole experience. The key point here is that every device has a unique characteristic that enrich the whole experience. Without him, it's not the same. The landscape is defined. What this kind of interaction defines is a multi-device experience that actually is defined by two or more devices, okay? Most of the time, use it simultaneously because that's the sense of this kind of experience. And in this kind of network, we can have two kind of roles and two kind of relationship. We can have collaboration when two or more devices, they work together to generate, to create the experience. And we can have control when one device is in charge and the other device is just a support to the experience. For the same logic, we can have a must-have role and a nice-to-have role. In this example, we can see, for example, Ducati for iPad, and the kind of relationship and roles that we have is control relationship, because actually it's the iPad that controls the game because actually it runs the code and therefore the game. And is the TV is the controller, and the role is a must-have for the iPad, because without the iPad there is no experience. And the TV is not required, but can make the difference. It's a very nice addition to it. Two huge examples of this approach are PlayStation and Xbox, because those guys, they spend a lot of time thinking about an ecosystem, surround their people with the right tools, try to enrich their experience. But life is never black or white. It's more about grayscale. And especially if you are a designer, it's like be a political, is the art of compromise. And for the majority of product, what you really need is start from one of the previous presented and then shape it according to your product requirements. What can happen here is the role relationship can be mixed, because what you have to keep in mind is that the angle, the vision, the long-term vision dictated by the ecosystem is the most important thing. The travel market is a very good example, because maybe we want a continuous experience across all the devices in the ecosystem, and we will see some practical example later. But maybe we also want some consistent experience between two devices, just because we have data that show that the people use more those devices instead of others. And in the market, in the travel market, the airline is the perfect example. As Josh said before me, the people just go to the desktop because maybe sometimes they prefer. But anyway, this is something that is suggested by the data, your analytic teams and things like that. You don't have to guess these things. But the people may tend to go to the desktop because they like bigger picture, whatever, and then they want to carry the reservation with them, so they need a smartphone. So maybe you can have a continuous experience across all the devices, but at the same time you want a consistency between desktop and tablet, because you know that the people tend to use those two devices for do a specific thing in the user journey. At the same time, you see wearable and say, why we can't enrich our guy's life in some way? So you start to think about complement their experience in the airport in some way, or maybe during the flight. But when we talk about ecosystem design, design is just 1/3 of the equation, and quite frankly, is the easy part. The game here is dictated by 3 actors, okay? We have the design, we have the user, and we have the context. For every user experience instances, we can define the design as a constant and the user and the context as a variable. What I mean by that is that every time you define an experience or an interaction, but actually interaction is just a small part, but people say interaction, but it's a user experience instance. The design is defining the binary word of your device and never change. From a scientific point of view, if you replicate the trial, you get the same data because that's the design. If you test a view, that's the view. If you don't change the design, you don't change anything. In opposition to that, we have the user and the context that actually change by nature and they evolve over time and they are never the same. If you redo whatever, an experience, an interaction, an experiment, user and context are never the same because the people change, the people learn, the context is windy, is mountain, is I'm running on the beach, everything is changing, even just walking. If it's rain, is one story. If it's sunny, it's a completely different story. If there is traffic because I'm walking, there is no people, it's a completely different story. There is a lot of small detail here. But, sorry, the user experience is a process. And honestly, it's a quite complex process. So we start to see what happens when your user interact with your device. And then we would see how the context change the rules of the game. Everything starts from your design. Your design can be captured by the user. Could be light waves, and we have the visual system. Can be vibration. It depends from the app. It depends from the device, from form factors. But the point here is everything starts from the design. The design is captured in some way, and once the design is captured in the user brain, the perception takes place. And what happens at the end of the perception is that the user responds to that process, taking or don't take any action, because from psychology point of view, don't take any action is considered an action. If you say, I don't have to kick that ass, I have to stay still, it's still an action. So, but the user, if you think about the user is just a tag. We have to design for the user. But I like it, the Use Lab introduction when we say we are more human experience. Well, I completely agree with this one, because what is user? User doesn't mean anything. People are just human beings. And the bad things or things in terms of user is that you try to address user problem. But that's not the case, it's never the case. You have to address humans' problem, because humans' needs come first compared to anything else. Like me, I need water. Doesn't matter if I want to do something else. I need it. So without this bottle, everything changes. I don't care about anything else. I need water. So when we start to talk about human being, we have to say that as a human, the user has something called cognitive research. Examples of cognitive research are attention, perception, memory, among others, like categorization, for example. So are all the things that the user uses when he interacts with your application. Without research, there is no anything. I remember my first year in psychology university, the professor say, I know no one's believed me. What is this? So he say, go home and try to do this. Try to, put the small things in a small hole, but first just try to do it. And then try to do the same, make some calculation. Something like 70 multiply 3 is equal to, And you can see that it's completely different because you are performing a very taxing activity for your mind. And a simple task like, put a small things in a small hole became a nightmare because you don't have research to do that. And the reason is because, like everything else, unfortunately for us, on this planet, resources are limited. So, as a consequence of this, what happens is that every time your user interacts with your lovely application, he gets some allocated resource because, of course, the human being, as a human being, he also needs to breathe, walk, look at things, like in a computer. If you have an application, you run an application, it doesn't get all the memory. Okay, in the iOS world, it's even worse. So if your application starts to hit a lot, too much memory, the operating system say, okay, I'm going to warn you now or kill you in a couple of minutes. So it never allocate all the resources because you need to leave. So, and this is very important because, as we said, there is not just the user and the device, there is also the context. And how the context change the rule of the game. You say, okay, Andrea, you talk for 20 minutes, and now you say that the context changed everything. Thank you. But that is exactly what happened. Because the resource that your user can use are the allocated resource for that task minus the resource required by the context. Again, try to read your news on your sofa, and then you browse your beautiful list view on your iPhone, blah, blah, blah. Try to do the same running. Try to do the same walking down the street with all the people and pay attention to the traffic light, or maybe on the bus when everything is, moving. The experience is completely different, and it's the same. And unfortunately, the majority of the people that work on design, they don't pay attention to this variable here. And for a designer, it's a must understand these dynamics if you want to design complex application, a complex ecosystem. Because as a designer, you have control on these things. And the user is tasked at any moment in time by your application, and this is your responsibility, and by the context that actually you can't control, but as you can see, you can predict. So, as we said, you can have control on the design, and you can predict the context. And the only reason because you want to invest so much effort in this is because you want to avoid this bad guy here, what is called a cognitive overload, is when the resources required in order to do something are greater than the resource allocated. Because maybe your brain allocates some resources and then the context taxes so hard the user they actually have to pay attention to other things. And the performance, boom, goes down. But unfortunately, we don't have time to dig too deep into design techniques, but something that I want to show you is how to put in place what we say so far. A good thing is when you work on your user journey, okay, composed by single activities, what you can do is to isolate the bad combination. So you can put there the device of choice, and this comes straight from your analytic inside team. It depends from your company organization, your small team, guerrilla approach, whatever. And then you can note the needs that actually dictate the goals for the user. And then summarize the task profile and the context profile. In this way, it's pretty easy to see the combination that represents some risk for you, because every time there is a wearable device, every time there is a mobile device, you have to pay attention. If you have some mid to high combination, that's the moment when you have to put in place some design technique instead of others. Could be from the simple things in the world, something like we have a payment form. We are asking too much things here? Maybe, maybe not. Do we want to split the payment form in 2 steps? Do we want a single form? That's all the kind of things that you can answer if you know the context and the dynamics. As you can imagine, the research team play a big role here because you need very good guys to get the job done here. Guys that they believe in that. Never hire someone that don't believe in your vision. So don't get a researcher just because it's good on paper if it doesn't believe in these things, because it's a bad approach. But it's also important to organize the team accordingly. So pretty simple approach is to allocate the design team to take care of the design, of course. Allocate the research team to the user. And in this case, the research team can use quantitative research methods, and then they can use analytics. All they have to do is gather information and data on your user, because what they have to do is create profile, archetypes, personas, whatever. You have to know the people. Young people, mid people, senior people, they all have different human needs. Okay, my father can do things in a slightly different way compared to me, just because there is a lot of years between me and him. And the third one is the context, when you want to assign both the design team to work in tandem with the research team, because when you model and predict the content, you have to put in place interaction skills and research skills. You have to know how to research, but you also have to know what you want to do. So that's why you need designer. So for that instance, the people, they work together on something that is not 100% research, is not 100% design, and we just jumping back to the same point. You need the right people. Because if the people work in one way and is not ready to adapt himself or a new approach, failure is around the corner. And if you picture, and that's the last thing that I want to share with you, if you picture an agile team, agile represented few roles. There is also Scrum Master, the dev team. We don't care for the moment. If you picture an agile team, you can have some vertical organization with the product owner that actually is in charge of the channel, with a single black bottleneck, as we said in the agile world. And is accountable for pretty much everything related to the channel. But what is more important, because as Josh showed in the previous presentation, if you remember, when he said, oh, why Amazon has 3 different menu? Well, do you remember the product that's scrolled from left to right? Why we have 3, 4, 5 different designers? How can it be possible? And the reason is because on top of this layer, you want to create something called a group. This is just a name, you can't change it. But it's something called a group. And here we can see the vertical organization, and the layer on top is the group. Basically, the group is composed by the people that they work on single experience. Could be the checkout, could be the profile. In Ryanair was called My Ryanair. Okay, could be whatever, every single instance of your user journey, the vertical piece that we previously saw in the user journey. And we want the people work closely more in this way than on the other. In the other, they can have stand up, the requirement definition, the product owner can, grooming the things, whatever. But that's the key point. The people, they live together. If you design the checkout, if you design, for example, product showing, as we saw in Amazon, checkout, whatever, they have to stay together. They have to spend the majority of their time during the day in the group, and then report in the team instead of just work in isolation. So putting everything together, what we say so far is that when we want to design an ecosystem, we have two main approaches. There is the consistent approach, the vertical one, and then you replicate. The continuous, when you embrace an hand-to-hand journey, and then the complementary, when there is two or more devices that help each other, they complement each other. But they also see that when we design something, the design is just 1/3 of the equation, because we also have the user, and we also have the context. And we also show that we have to allocate resources to these things. So you need people working on the context, you need people working on the user. And the reason is that, believe me, that if you follow these guidelines, not guideline, but suggestion probably is better. If you follow this kind of approach, and if you embrace this kind of philosophy, I can guarantee you that your product will be a better product. Thank you very much.